The anime begins with our protagonist named Makoto, thinking as everyone else does that going to a new world is all good, with a classic transport to the world where he meets a kind goddess who grants powers and is adored by everyone, while having great adventures with lovely heroines by his side. However, his experience was quite different. He was living his normal little life, until out of nowhere he finds himself floating along with a sphere that claims to be a god, and shows his appearance introducing himself as the ruler of the night realm called Tsukiyomi. He says that he came to take it to a goddess from another world thanks to his parents who made a pact with her, which was basically that in exchange for living in Japan, they promised one day to deliver to the goddess the most valuable thing to them, which in this case was one of their 3 children, and the guy was awarded. And guys, help us grow our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. We have a lot more exciting content coming up that you don't want to miss. So give it a thumbs up so we can beat the goal of 153 likes on this video. And now let's go. After leaving a letter for his family, he is transported to meet the goddess, where he discovers that she was a bit of a troublemaker, and to his bad luck, she doesn't like him very much, even calling him an ugly duckling, and decides to send him to literally the ends of the earth, giving him only the ability to understand non-human languages. The goddess is so displeased with him that she literally throws Makoto down from above, discarding him like a cockroach. Tsukiyomi appears and has a conversation with him on air. We think he is going to save Makoto, but he only explains that on Earth his body and powers lived under pressure, but that in this world it was going to be different. And after this he says goodbye, saying that he will enter a sleep of hundreds of years, and releases Makoto again to keep falling, but in fact, the god was right and he falls softly. However, the goddess wasn't kidding about sending him to the ends of the earth. He fell into the middle of nowhere, and after 3 days he makes his way towards a high mountain, having nowhere else to go, and without finding any food or soul life, being in an endless loneliness with only the sound of his voice and his rumbling belly. Until finally, he hears a voice calling for help and is excited to see other people, but comes across an orc and a 2-headed dog, which thanks to the power the goddess gave him, he could understand both of them perfectly. Makoto decides to save the orc and is surprised at his ability to kill the big dog in a single blow. The orc gets scared and even thinks about running away or fighting, but realizes it's impossible. So she introduces herself saying that her name is Emma and explains that she was heading towards the mountain to serve as a sacrifice to a dragon named Shen. She explains that her village was having problems with a dense fog and their crops stopped reproducing. But since they started with the sacrifice everything has improved, and she tells him that there is a place nearby where the 2 of them could rest. Makoto is enchanted by the little pig and begins to see her as his hero. And so, he goes with her to a place with other orcs, where he finally gets food and discovers that Emma has powers like transport magic. Realizing that this was something that everyone in the world could do, Makoto asks Emma to teach him something basic. She then teaches him how to throw a fireball and he shows ease in learning. However, he discovers that everyone had levels, and since he didn't know his, Emma takes a piece of paper to measure his level, thinking that he should be level 300, but soon discovers that the poor guy is level 1 and she decides to help by teaching him other spells. But the next day, the guy runs away, leaving only a thank you note where he says he took the list of spells and some equipment she gave him, and also promises that he would save the poor thing from sacrifice by facing the dragon Shen, which is known as an invincible being. On the way, Makoto decides to train his fire power, discovering that he can change its form into a bow, and decides to shoot the only thing he has around to train his aim, but finds out a little late that there were some creatures there that ended up being barbecued. But it was okay because they were the villains and the real culprits of the orcs' problems, so by accident, Makoto actually saved the little sacrificial pig. But this guy is unlucky and awakens Shen, who was nearby, who covers everything with a red mist and attacks him. But Makoto discovers another power. He could see through the mist and see where the dragon was. So he begins to attack Shen with his fireballs, going so far as to injure him, even though he is a fire-resistant creature. After a few punches from Makoto, the dragon can't take the beating anymore and locks him in a cube where he would have illusory memories. And of course, the ugly kid just thinks of a beautiful girl begging to date him. And Shen is also enchanted by the images as she realizes that he came from another world. Makoto then becomes stronger and stronger and frees himself from the illusion, but is surprised by the dragon acting all cute and harmless, asking for them to make a pact that would benefit them both, saying that he would be his master in exchange for seeing more of the world from Earth. He then gives Makoto an 80% advantage of his power and turns into a beautiful samurai girl. And the guy still complains because he wanted to ride the dragon, but Shen explains that because she was the weakest, she was in a dominant role and couldn't use her dragon form. Shen then shows Makoto a portal to a subspace where existed in her head, but getting there, she finds it strange because the place should be a dark and empty place and instead was filled with plants and fruits of the earth because of the pact with Makoto. But despite being a very large and cozy place, it has a wall of mist marking the limit, and he reflects on how in that place he would probably be free of the goddess. To save all the orcs from sacrifice, he goes back to the edge of the world to meet Emma, where he introduces Shen and explains that the orcs would no longer have to make any sacrifices, and everyone celebrates the news. In the middle of the celebration, Shen invites them to leave that horrible place and go live in her subspace without even consulting Makoto, who is in shock when he finds out the news and meets a very cute mini Shen who is a fragment of her. Shen, in half a second, transports the entire village of orcs to subspace, and after a few days with them living there, Makoto discovers that he could create not only fire but also earth, water, lightning, and darkness, and that he couldn't only master air for some reason. Meanwhile, Shen was filling up on novels that were in Makoto's memories, as well as making the young man a lord in that world since he was master of the mistress of that subspace. But he was already tired of her watching his memories, and Shen decides to go out and try to build a TV where he could watch the novels present in his memories, which she had already saved using her power. But with them floating in front of Makoto, he remembers his parents making him decide to go after the path they took in that world. But when he leaves his residence, he realizes that the orcs were having trouble cutting down some trees to free up space, and decides to help them with a tiny but absurdly powerful knife that cuts down the tree with ease. And we find out that he also had healing powers that he uses to heal a wound from one of the orcs. But to his bad luck, he ends up with a cut on his hand and discovers that he can heal others but cannot heal himself. Suddenly, Shen comes back carrying an elderly dwarf on her lap and realizes that the cut on Makoto's hand would attract the creature that was following the dwarf. At that moment, a giant black spider appears, and we find out that it was a creature tormented by an eternal hunger. But Shen refuses to fight it, saying that she was too busy holding the dwarf, and explains to Makoto that after the spider suffered some injuries, it would leave. Then, Makoto attacks her by cutting off some of the spider's legs, but the spider has a very high regenerative power, requiring an even more powerful attack. So, Makoto attacks with all his might, but overdoes it, making the spider like him for doing so much damage to it. Makoto continues to attack, but the spider regenerates and attacks him, wounding him and feeding on his blood. This makes him very angry, and he attacks the spider with consecutive attacks, but after a while, he collapses without strength. Shen runs to try to protect Makoto, but we see that, in fact, the spider had fallen in love with him, and his blood had finally satisfied its immense hunger, making the creature wish to live forever with the boy. Shen then suggests that she make a pact with Makoto as she did, to acquire a more human and less frightening form to please her love, and so she does. After Makoto is healed, he wakes up and finds himself face to face with the spider in her human form and all lovey-dovey. He complains to Shen about the idea, but she says it was better than having a giant spider after him, and now the boy had two monster girls at his command, who ask him to give them a new name that would be to his liking. After much thought, Shen is named Tomoe, and the spider named Mio, and the two are overjoyed with their new names. After this, the dwarf asks to live in subspace with his people, and when Makoto notices, there are already a bunch of people living in the place, with him very lost as to who all these people are, and he discovers that besides the orcs and the dwarves, there were Tomoes Clan, the lizards, and Mio's clan, the elks. After so many creatures around him, Makoto decides to go in search of human villages in order not to freak out, and after a while of searching, he finally finds a girl who runs after him scared. He goes after her without understanding anything, but when he arrives in the village, everyone is already prepared to attack the poor guy, who realizes that he has received the ability of the goddess to know other non-human languages. This means that he just doesn't understand the language of his own people. To make matters worse for him, he discovers that the language of the humans is literally the universal language of the world, where everyone spoke the language, but they explain that this was not the reason he scared his people, but his absurd amount of mana that overflows from him being seen as something similar to several demons, which means he would scare anyone. So he decides to master the language and get some equipment to suppress his magic, but after a whole month of training, he realizes that he has only learned to listen, read, and write, without being able to actually speak the language, but luckily he can literally write in the air. Then, the dwarves give him a ring that suppresses his power, changing the color to red when he reaches his limit. And so Makoto leaves for the city of humans with Tomoe and Mio, with him having to wear a mask so as not to be recognized, and he realizes that all the humans in that world are much more beautiful than he is, making him realize that in that world he was actually quite ugly. Later, they spot an adventurers guild and decide to go there. At the guild, they invent that Makoto suffered a curse that prevented him from speaking, and he communicates by writing. The girl explains that everyone who joins the guild starts at rank E and would rise in rank as they complete jobs, the maximum rank being SSS. She then measures the level of the girls, and Tomoe discovers she is at level 1320, and Mio at level 1500, leaving everyone in the place frightened by such power, and Tomoe angry at being below Mio. But when it's time to measure Makoto, he discovers he's still at level 1, even with all his evolution over the past few months. They also discover that a girl named Sophia, a dragon slayer, was the person who was at the top of the rankings at the time. Arriving at the lodging, Makoto is startled by the price, but Tomoe intimidates the guy who quickly lowers the price for them. Once they are already staying, he decides to go out to eat with Mio, leaving Tomoe behind to protect their wagon from thieves. And so, while Tomoe is forced to protect the wagon alone, the two go out to eat together with Mio, all in love, until they bump into a little girl named Rennyon who asks for their help. At the lodging, Rennyon explains that her sister had gone out to look for work and has not returned. Meanwhile, Tomoe ends up killing the guys who tried to confront her and captures the only survivor for questioning. At the lodging, Makoto starts to complain to Tomoe, but upon noticing Rennyon, he ends the discussion, leaving Tomoe grateful to the little girl, and Makoto offers bed and food to Rennyon, who delivers a drawing to help them find her sister. Later they find out from the prisoner's memories that the group that attacked the carriage was responsible for the disappearance of Rennyon's sister, and he gives the order for Tomoe and Mio to go and rescue her, taking it more seriously than usual because he realizes that the girl was very similar to the Earth girl he liked. The two are not very happy with the order they received, but they had chosen to serve him, so they couldn't complain. As Makoto and Rennyon went to sell some fruits from Subspace, we see that Rennyon actually knew exactly what had happened to her sister, who hadn't been able to handle doing a service and ended up being taken prisoner to pay her debt. She had also been caught and approached Makoto at their request to steal him to pay off her sister's debt in exchange for her being freed. At the same time, her sister named Toa was being saved by Tomoe and Mio, and everyone in the place tries to stop the rescue thinking they are super strong, until the two use their abilities and kick their asses, crushing them all like insects. Meanwhile, Rennyon, who didn't know that her sister was actually being rescued, is at a loss as she doesn't want to steal Makoto, who was being so kind to her, but at the same time, she doesn't see any other option to save her sister. After completing the rescue, Tomoe and Mio begin to literally destroy everything to compete who was the strongest, and the poor girl stands there watching the two crazies blowing up the city completely. But in the confusion, Toa runs into Rennyon, and they have a very cute reunion and end up cuddling at the end, while Makoto throws Tomoe and Mio out as punishment for destroying the town. The next day, Makoto leaves with the Toa group to new towns, and we find out that Tomoe had alternated the people's memories, making them believe that monsters had been responsible for the destruction of the place so that no one would remember that it had been Mio and Tomoe. But with the destruction, everyone needed to redo their records in the Adventurers Guild, and Tomoe decides that this time she would stay at a level above Mio, going away to train to outdo her. This makes Mio excited at the idea of having Makoto all to herself, but she forgot that she would have everyone else on the trip along. On the journey in search of new cities, they encounter several creatures on the way, and Makoto keeps asking Mio to defeat them while Toa and her group collect some parts of the creatures that are valuable. Until Mio gets tired and refuses to continue, having to do all the work, Makoto questions why the crew didn't kill the creatures. They explain that ruby eyes are very rare monsters that would easily kill them. Then Makoto realizes he would have to solve it on his own, and everyone is worried if he would be able to defeat them since he was only level 1. But he easily attacks everyone with arrows at the exact location, leaving the group excited, getting 12 ruby eye monster eyes. And so, they go back to redo their registrations, but Makoto was still at level 1 and insists that Mio only register when Tomoe returns and decides to look at the available guild quests, since it was independent of his level, and ends up seeing a level S quest looking for ruby eyes. He then divides the material with the whole group, keeping all 12 eyes and leaving much of the rest with the group. Makoto then has the idea of them eating together to celebrate the end of the trip, since they had been companions for a while, and Toa chooses a great restaurant for them where we get to know her group better. Louisa is an elf and artillery woman, Hazel is a master alchemist, and Renina a priest knight, and lastly, Toa herself, the shadow thief, all being of high levels. After dinner, Makoto and Mio go back to the lodging, but he asks her to go ahead so he can get the materials for the cart, and Mio gets thoughtful with the two alone in the room and even thinks of making one of the beds disappear to force them to sleep together, but he ends up returning before and falls asleep, leaving Mio frustrated. The next day, the two return to Subspace, with Makoto already able to create the portals, and meets Emma and the Tomoe fragment that informs him about everything, informing the roles that each group has assumed. The orcs, Mio's clan, were settling into the mountains while the dwarves were working on repairs and equipment. The lizards, on the other hand, were in charge of cleaning the farms, and the orcs were building a residence for their master Makoto, who is amazed at the size of the construction, but Emma explains that it wouldn't be a problem, as they had established ways of working based on his memories that Tomoe had saved. At this point, the dwarf arrives to show Makoto some armor that his clan had made for him, but he only likes a protective overcoat, and after putting it on he finds that the clothing changed colors, with blue for defense and red for mobility to move faster. However, it also absorbed a quota of magic which soon reaches its limit, so Makoto asks the dwarf to make a new one that could last longer with him as well as the ring. After this, Makoto finally goes to the customer named Rembrandt, to perform the mission and deliver the ruby eyes, but he thinks Makoto had made a mistake because it was something considered impossible for someone of level 1 to perform. But Makoto delivers the eyes, leaving the guy surprised. He explains that the eyes were for him to make a medicine to cure his wife and daughters of a disease caused by a curse of a sorcerer who was captured and killed. Makoto asks to witness the medicine being made and explains that he knows an alchemist who could do the job. But Rembrandt explains that he would need 2 ruby eyes per person, and Makoto shows that he has many more eyes with him, making Rembrandt and all the servants in the house celebrate. After this, Makoto goes to register with the Merchants Guild so that he can trade. There he finds out that he would have to take 2 tests, a written one having a manual to prepare himself, and a practical one where he would have to acquire some supplies such as some creature parts or potions. He then buys the manual so that he can study for the first test, but decides to ignore it and take the test at that moment, causing the receptionist to find it strange since it was a test with extremely difficult questions. However, the content was similar to elementary school on Earth, and Makoto gets an A with less than half the time, making the teacher stunned. So, he goes on to the practical test, having to get 4 difficult materials or of similar value in up to 3 days. The professor starts to think he won't make it, but as soon as he shows him parts of red bees, materials he got on the trip with the Toa group, the professor is even more impressed, and he gets to join the guild. Meanwhile, we finally see Tomoe training and killing a giant crab, which she uses to feed herself in subspace. After a while, Makoto also returns there with a plan to create a good reputation for the fruit to be marketed for a better price so that people would not suspect the subspace city. Suddenly, Tomoe calls him to the place where her memories were, saying that she had something with Mio. He runs there thinking he had a big problem, but in fact, the girl had only gotten addicted to the anime present in his memory, and now Makoto had a soap opera addict and an otaku. Back at the lodging in the human city, which only had 2 beds for the 3 of them, the 2 girls try to make Makoto choose which one he would sleep with, but the young man decides to sleep on the couch anyway, and the 2 decide they would have to come up with a plan afterward to catch their master and fall asleep dreaming about anime and soap operas. The next day, Makoto reunites with Hazel to meet Rembrandt to make the ruby-eyed medicine while being followed by 2 adventurers who don't want Rembrandt to achieve his goal. Arriving at Rembrandt's domicile, Hazel is super nervous to learn that they were doing a service for Rembrandt, since he had a reputation for being a dangerous fellow. Although he doesn't feel very comfortable, he was already there, so he goes to prepare the potions, which he finds out are quite simple. However, after delivering the first vial to the worker Morris, he drops the other 2, and Makoto gives it his all to save the vials. After the confusion, they meet up with Rembrandt and find out that he was all injured and could not give the potion to his wife. He tells them that at first, the illness they thought was a simple fever, but gradually she and her daughters lost their hair, their eyes became red, and they lost their minds to the point of attacking anything that came near them. Makoto then gives him the idea to help by immobilizing them so that Rembrandt can give the medicine, and so he goes to his wife where he realizes that, in fact, there wasn't much left of human traits in her, but luckily, he manages to mobilize her, and although Rembrandt takes a bite by giving the potion, his dear wife is cured. After saving one of the daughters, the clumsy Hazel almost drops the last vial once again, but Morris saves him, and Makoto leaves for the last daughter who was still slightly conscious. After all 3 take the potion, Rembrandt is grateful to the 2 and the goddess, which Makoto knew she might not be very kind. On the way out, Makoto meets up with Mio and Tomoe when the 3 are attacked by the guys who were following him. The 2 offer Mio and Tomoe to switch sides, and Mio agrees to sit out the fight in exchange for payment to Tomoe's surprise, who didn't know it was a request from Makoto himself, to avoid the 2 of them getting into a fight like last time. But Tomoe takes care of everyone quickly, making the guys beg for Mio's help, who refuses, saying that she only said she would sit out the fight, and that she didn't care if she won her payment with them alive or not. The 2 then try to fight alone, but despite having their partner defeated, Lime asks Tomoe to show mercy, and after she reads his mind and sees that he was helping children from an orphanage, she decides to spare him. Lime tells her that he didn't want them to wake up Rembrandt's family, but doesn't show that he knew the curse had put them at risk, saying that the wizard said he would only put them to sleep as a lesson for Rembrandt to rethink his actions and the way he makes adventurers suffer with his missions. But upon discovering what the wizard had in fact done, he asks Rembrandt for forgiveness, who shows generosity by sparing his life, punishing him only by removing his adventurer's guild. Later, Tomoe meets with Lime and gives him a katana made by the dwarves to replace the sword she had broken in the fight, and offers him to work for her as her spy in exchange for a good sum. Back in subspace, Emma tells them about the new problem. The Ors and Lizard Warriors didn't seem to be happy training with the 3 of them. So, Makoto decides to spy on the orcs to find out why they were unhappy, and finds out that they actually disliked his training because he took it too hard, making them feel like failures, and Tomoe returns saying that the lizards were also unhappy about the same issue, showing she was disappointed with her clan, while Mio was delighted with the tomato that only existed in subspace. The 2 think about how they would learn easier if the orcs and lizards worked together, instead of wanting to hide their techniques from each other. So Tomoe has an idea. They gather the two clans together and ask the strongest warrior of each to fight each other. And after a hard fight, with them demonstrating their skills, the orc wins the fight. After this, Tomoe gives them a heavy-handed speech, saying that they should be stronger than this, and that from now on, once a week, they will all participate in individual disputes between the clans, so that they can be evaluated, and this idea will expand to the other clans as well, and with this, they will learn each other's techniques to improve themselves. They are wary of the idea, but Makoto gives a motivational speech, and they get more excited, and Tomoe names the event the Subspace Ranking. Later, they return to the Night Guild where Tomoe is disappointed to find that she was still at a lower level than Mio. After they make their records in the guild, the receptionist tells them that many adventurers like Lime had retired, and others were recovering from injuries, not knowing that the reason was that they had attacked Makoto. She asks him to help train some adventurer to make them have more of the higher level guild. And so Makoto asks Tomoe to train Toa's group, but as usual, she goes heavy on the training by demanding too much of them, and after a while, asks the group to face a small group of shadow tails, creatures of a level far above what they could handle. But instead of lowering the charges, Tomoe just paralyzes the creatures for a moment to coordinate the group, and with the right strategy, they manage to defeat them all. She then asks them to prepare to defeat an entire pack the next day, leaving them alone in the forest. The next day, the receptionist is concerned for their safety when she learns of Tomoe's training. But the group arrives exhausted after defeating not just one but two entire packs of the creatures. Meanwhile, Makoto asks Rembrandt to rent space for him to open his store, and Rembrandt tells him about a neutral town where he could open a store without restrictions, and Makoto gets super excited about being able to have his own store. Meanwhile, another group of adventurers enters the forest where Toa's group had hunted the creatures, not realizing they were being watched by two forest guardians, Iris and Aqua, who quickly take them down. In subspace, Makoto discovers a surprise party to celebrate the achievement of his merchant guild, where we see that Mio's clan has taken on a much more human appearance, as a way to please his master. During the party, he talks to a dwarf, asking if he didn't feel confined since he never left subspace. But the dwarf denies this, saying that it was a wonderful place to live. Even so, Makoto offers him to help in his store in the city of humans, so he can sell his materials, and the dwarf gets excited. Later, Mio and Tomoe are talking quietly when suddenly they feel, through their connection with Makoto, as if their master has died and come back to life. They think he was in a life or death battle and are relieved to see that he was actually quite safe training his archery aim. However, the two are quite shaken since they felt he had died a few times. Makoto explains that to concentrate on the target, he completely empties his mind. The two explain that people can only empty their minds like that when they die, something he did without even noticing every time he concentrated. He came back to life with even more mana, reaching a power level similar to a god and increasing the subspace more and more, which would make it difficult for him to hide his power from everyone. Mainly, it could cause problems with the goddess who already did not like him very much. Therefore, he could no longer train archery for safety. Later, walking through the city of humans, Makoto ends up bumping into a sexy young woman who picks on him. Mio and Tomoe drag him from there to the hotel where they both question if they weren't enough for their master, and dead jealous they lock him in the room and decide to force him to have relations with them. They even tear off the poor guy's blouse. But in desperation, he uses his power to stop them and escapes to subspace. The next day, Mio shows up regretful for having frightened her master and apologizes. Makoto then tells her it was okay, and to prove it, he calls her to go with him to negotiate some flowers with the two guardians of the forest. Since the flowers would be valuable for his store, she is very excited at the idea of being alone with her master one more time. There they meet a band of adventurers trying to steal the flower, but Mio traps them with her web. The two go on to try to negotiate with the guardians, the ogres of the forest, but the group of thieves shows up and disrupts Makoto's business, making them think that he was with the group of thieves, which doesn't make Mio very happy. They are attacked when Makoto realizes that one of the thieves was the same woman who had given him the ball the day before. Makoto asks for help from Tomoe, who was watching from afar, and asks her to send the group into subspace before they get hurt. After giving Mio some of her blood to calm her down, she blocks their attack so Makoto can explain the misunderstanding by making it clear that he was just a merchant wanting to do business. They then take them to their village where they meet the elder and find out that the forest ogres are ancestors of the elves. They were the ones who created and protected the forest in which they lived hidden, thanks to a barrier made by a dragon which was weakening. Afterwards, Makoto meets the master of Iris and Aqua, and Mio spies on him at Makoto's request. She discovers, through her spider sense, that the subject was possessed by a spirit. After Mio reports what she discovered to Makoto, he asks her to switch places with Tomoe. Later, he meets with the forest ogres when suddenly the spirit comes out of the forest ogre's body. Makoto discovers it to be a lich, which is sent into subspace by Tomoe. After this, Makoto discovers that the dragon that made the mist for them had been Tomoe herself. She explains to everyone that she was now Makoto's servant whom they should respect. Back in subspace, Lich explains that he was a human who had infiltrated the ogres of the forest to study their abilities to become a Grant, a kind of superior human who can travel freely between worlds, but had become a Lich by accident. But Tomoe explains that Grants were actually people who had accidentally ended up on other worlds, and it was something so difficult and risky that it was almost suicidal, leaving the Lich devastated and without any other goal. Since Makoto wanted to learn more magic from someone with experience as a Lich, Tomoe suggests that he become a servant to Makoto, just as she and Mio did, and so he does, reverting to his human appearance in a somewhat inappropriate form for the girl's eyes, according to Makoto, and being named Shiki. Meanwhile, the young thieves have been left in place without any kind of supervision and decide to steal the treasures from subspace. Shortly afterward, while Tomoe was talking about teaching everything to the newest member of Makoto's servant team, she suddenly suffers a severe head injury, starting to bleed thanks to an explosion she had in the subspace, a place that was inside her head, causing her to fall to the ground bleeding. Makoto and Shiki go together to the scene of the explosion. On the way, Makoto is surprised by the amount of wounded, the worst of which is one of the members of Mio's clan who is barely alive, and Shiki says that he alone could not save him, so Makoto helps him until the creature's life is stable. Then a little child appears, warning that one of the orcs was trying to stop the humans responsible for the mess. He then goes there, arriving at the place of the explosion. Suddenly Makoto begins to have memories of the adventurer seeing how she attacked his people from subspace, discovering that both the orc and the Tomoe fragment were dead. He then finds the adventurer determined to end her life, leaving the girl completely frightened. She tries to defend herself and beg for her life, but nothing works. Makoto eliminates her in a cold way, crying afterward for what he had done. The next day everyone holds a ceremony in honor of Tomoe's fragment and the orc. Later, he asks his servants if, by making the pact with them, he acquires their powers, explaining that he was able to see the memories of the girl he eliminated, a power of Tomoe. But Tomoe explains that this only happened with a strong bond of trust that the two had, which makes Mio jealous once again, and the two get into another argument as usual. After a while, Makoto decides to make a division in subspace to prevent children and other more fragile creatures from having contact with the adventurers, and finds that the injured Alki was recovering well. After this, he goes to show his feelings to the friend of the orc who died by apologizing since he, as a master, had failed to keep everyone safe. But we realize that everyone was grateful to Makoto and did not blame him for what happened. Later, Makoto says he would go with Shiki on a long journey to find out more about that world, the goddess, and his parents' journey, giving more of his memories to Mio and Tomoe as gifts since he would be gone for quite some time. After that, the two leave, but as soon as they leave subspace, the goddess locates Makoto and throws the poor guy to a distant location, driving his three minions crazy with worry. Meanwhile, Makoto is attacked, and his two fingers are taken off by the strongest adventurer in the world, Sophia and her dragon lancer. Wounded and not knowing what was happening, he tries to call one of his servants, but none of them answer. He discovers that the goddess had summoned him in the middle of a war between demons and humans, where Sophia had chosen to stand against her own kind. Since the goddess had placed him right in the way of the demons, the two think he was there to defend the humans, the goddess darlings, and confront Makoto with everything. He tries to explain that he was not there to fight, but they both don't believe him, forcing Makoto to take off his rings, releasing all his immense power, leaving them both without time to react to so many attacks in a row. Sophia tries to use her sword, but Makoto easily breaks it. At that moment, she takes the opportunity to arrest the young man, and Lancer uses his power to lift them both in the air, and Sophia releases him from above. Once again, Makoto falls from above, but this time full of dangers around him. He then uses his immense power to destroy the obstacles and attack the two adventurers, hitting everyone nearby and cutting off Lancer's leg and destroying Sophia's armor, who vows revenge on Makoto. Later, Makoto wakes up next to his lovely handmaidens, and after a while, Shiki deduces that the goddess sent him to war, trying to force him to fight the demons, and she would certainly keep an eye on him. Makoto then decides to leave only with Shiki since the goddess probably already knew about him and to leave Mio and Tomoe as an extra precaution. He then finds out that Tomoe had made a new fragment of herself called Komi, a little girl just as cute as the old one, who calls Makoto daddy, leaving Mio jealous as always. After this, Makoto has one more discovery. The forest ogres were also in subspace, being trained by the community clans. In the human world, Makoto finally opens his store, which is a great success for its exclusive materials, and back in subspace, he reminisces about how it all began and how he got so far, while Mio and Tomoe once again drive him crazy with one of their fights. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this.